Okay, good afternoon, good morning, depending where you are. Everybody, thank you for joining us today. My name is Chris Harvey. I'm the Operations Director at IMSCAD, based here in London, in the UK. We're here today for one of our 30-minute webinars, Civil Infrastructure Suite Virtualized. Really briefly, before we kick off, I know there's a few latecomers today, so we'll do some housekeeping while everyone else is joining in. Really simply, you've got your Citrix GoToWebinar taskbar on the right, on the side there. At the bottom, you will see questions. If you've got any questions for me while we're going along, by all means, pop them in there. We will have a Q&A session at the end when I will open things up for everybody. At this stage, everyone's on mute, so I'll be the only person you'll be hearing. I will open people up for questions. If there are questions at the end, obviously we can take stuff offline. That's your basic housekeeping. I'm hoping everyone's here now. In essence, right, today, Civil Infrastructure Suite Virtualized. My name is Chris Harvey, as I say. So what we're going to do today, we're going to talk about IMSCAD very briefly, give you an introduction to us and to why we're here, why we're talking to you about this. We're going to also talk about, obviously, infrastructure systems. Quite a key point, obviously relevant to our webinar today, but I just want to give a sort of bit of background to what the systems are trying to achieve and what they're about. Then we're going to look at, obviously, the Autodesk products, the infrastructure design suite, talk about the specific needs and the demands that places on IT. We're going to look at how virtualization can meet those needs, the needs of the business, the needs of the users, and obviously provide the solutions that can support these systems and meet the demands for the users and equally the control levels. We're going to talk a little bit about clouds, and I'm only going to do that just to give you some clarity on how we do the deployments, just to explain that. And we'll obviously have a brief look at costs in terms of what you can expect to pay for these kind of deployments, just so we've got some basic overview for you. So that's today's webinar. That's roughly where we're going to follow. So I'm going to kick off. I hope everyone's with us. As I say, any questions, pop them in the questions box. If I don't respond to them during the presentation, then obviously we'll have some time at the end. So onwards we go. So I'm going to start with IMSCAD. Well, it's IMSCAD Global. We are the global leaders in CAD virtualization. We're basically a virtualization company based in London. We've got 2 data centers here, 2 in New York, 1 in Zurich. We started life actually as an Autodesk reseller. We were invited to become a reseller by Autodesk to help them with their Max 3D product, which was the first one they brought into the virtualized environment. Obviously they had no skills or specific skills with virtualization, so they got us involved to help with that. We were looking at that from a deployment on a Citrix perspective, and it very much became evident to us that the benefits we were going to see in deploying things in virtual environments, certainly these applications, were if we could do all of the applications for the clients. Doing a single application wasn't always what was needed, and we really needed to look at how we could extend this to the other applications, certainly the resource-hungry ones that Autodesk offered. So we worked very closely with Autodesk in the development of the AutoCAD and Revit ranges. We ran international pilots in key sites, different environments to test out the performance and get a sort of deeper understanding of how those products would work in a virtualized environment. Following those pilot tests, obviously, Autodesk launched the Citrix-ready products, the 2012 versions, Autodesk, AutoCAD and obviously Revit, at which point we decided that we were best placed providing a support network for Autodesk channel partners, Autodesk directly in terms of their consulting and major accounts team, and also to Autodesk end users on a global basis. So that's really the role we sit in. We gave up our position as a reseller. We weren't particularly good at it, to be quite honest, but we found an area where our skills were particularly needed. And it was really filling that gap between the virtualization companies, your traditional Citrix solutions providers, and the AutoCAD and Autodesk product and application suppliers, where one was looking at the platform, the other was looking at the application, and really in order to get these resource-hungry applications to perform effectively and to a suitable standard, it was necessary to take that middle ground between the two and really get a deep understanding of both the virtualization platform, but equally of the applications in order to get the performance that's needed. So that's really where we sit. Now, since that date, we've done a lot more engagements with Autodesk and their channel partners. We do testing for them. Of late, our latest batch of testing was to do with the suites and getting those ready for virtualization, which of course we've now seen. We also do testing for Nvidia, who are a key player in this industry in terms of the graphics cards that really make this whole technology possible, and for us to perform this in a virtual environment, it's one of the key aspects in terms of the hardware deployment. So we do testing with Nvidia, also with Dell. We work very closely with Hewlett-Packard. So we're really sort of covering the main bases on the key players in the industry. We are the global leaders. I think we've deployed and we support more users than anybody else on virtual platforms running 3D applications. So that's really where IMSCAD fit in. That's why you're listening to us. That's why I'm here today. But today's webinar is going to be about the infrastructure design suite. So let's talk a little bit about infrastructure. Let's look at the infrastructure systems we're talking about. Well, it's really extending beyond what we term traditional civil engineering. Rather than focus on individual structures or components, infrastructure systems emphasize how different structures behave together as a system in relation to the community. So therefore, by definition, they're often spatial, very dynamic. The technical aspects of infrastructure engineering need to be understood in the social, economic, political, cultural context in which they exist. We need to consider them over the whole life cycle, and that includes not just the design and construction phases, but also the maintenance, the operation, performance, even disaster response, and ultimately through to the final destruction. So in essence, infrastructure design software improves the ability to plan, to design, management workflows, streamlining projects. It allows more holistic analysis of project information. This facilitates evaluation of multiple what-if scenarios, so designers can easily weigh environmental constraints, aesthetic concerns, construction costs, and do that throughout the life cycle of the project. So let's specifically look at Autodesk Infrastructure Design Suite. So what we've seen, as I indicated earlier, we've seen some changes this year from Autodesk in terms of licensing. We now have a clear line from Autodesk on how their licensing sits, which is that any of their products can be used in a virtual environment without falling outside the license agreement. The support that they provide now has been confirmed on the suites, and the Infrastructure Design Suite is one of those suites that is supported directly by Autodesk. So we've really seen what we saw as the two main objections. One was license compliance. The second was the ability of the suites to be used on Citrix. And we've seen both of those restrictions now removed in the FY14 releases from Autodesk. So that's really quite a significant change. So we've now got approval from Autodesk, and that's the real thing as to why we can now use these Infrastructure Design Suite in a virtual environment. And I'll go on in a minute to explain why that is such a good thing, how we can meet the specific needs and demands so effectively in a virtual environment. But let's talk about the Infrastructure Design Suite really briefly. Well, if you put all of this bundle of software together, we've got Civil 3D, AutoCAD, Map 3D, Revit, Navis, Manage, Raster Design, Utility Design, InfraWorks, 3ds Max, Robot Structure. I mean, there's a whole host of applications here. We are probably talking about 45 gig of software just to load this onto a system. So it's quite a bulky suite by the very nature, as we said. These are very spatial and dynamic in terms of the systems and the way they work, and that brings its own problems, which I'll touch upon in a moment. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the specific needs of the design systems and certainly the Infrastructure Design Suite from Autodesk. So it covers such a broad base of diverse technical specialities. We're covering scientists, environmental planners, architects, engineers, and many more. And it's the collaboration between these and the ability of systems to reflect how changes made in one discipline will impact on the others that's the key to the success of these design systems. So by their very nature, we're dealing with large-scale, often very complex models. This means we have huge volumes of data that need to be processed, often reprocessed to reflect the changes and impacts on numerous varying scenarios. So the key demand is the hardware resources needed to process the data. In a traditional distributed or desktop workstation environment, this means significant expenditure on hardware. And equally, the management of this distributed hardware also puts a huge strain on IT and represents a significant cost to IT also. So loaded on this distributed hardware, of course you've got all of the apps, so we probably don't load everything for everyone, so let's say 10 apps, probably got about 45 gig there. What we will say, and I think it's safe to say, in most deployments we look at, there's always a mix of applications. Nobody's just using Autodesk products. We've got some third-party stuff coming in there as well, perhaps some specialist add-ons and plugins that we'll use. So there can be a big mix of applications. But roughly, I think in infrastructure systems, we're normally looking at 45 gig of data just to deploy a new user on a workstation deployment. So if we consider the implications of deploying both hardware and software for new user groups, potentially across multi-sites, or indeed cross-geo, so there's a huge management expenditure and commitment required to do this. So on top of that, the next thing we need to consider is, of course, is the management of all of those applications and version control, doing updates, doing patches, doing fixes across all of that software on all of that distributed hardware. So one of the other key requirements is, of course, to support collaboration. It's a big thing now. We've brought BIM in, becomes a part of development systems in most disciplines now. So it's the collaboration between all of these different users from different disciplines. They need to access from many different locations. During different parts of the project lifecycle, this will change and be varying collaborators and people who need input and access. It will include site workers, field operatives working in remote locations, and they all need, of course, to access the latest plans. So the need for these remote workers, the hardware resource demands to enable them to access both the apps and the data they need, and actually to be able to do their work and power those applications, puts a further significant investment, potentially in expensive mobile hardware. So IT basically has to provide the availability of the right hardware, the right applications, the right versions to the right user. And they also have to consider the management of user access, the additional requirement to frequently provide access to new users, new groups of users, or remove users as the project lifecycle develops. So obviously all the users need access to not only the apps but also the data. So sending large files and data sets across the network can have time implications, periods of limited productivity for users as they wait for their data to arrive, and the data they need to work on to get their job done. So this will put the strain on the network, can lead obviously to additional expenditure in network upgrades or indeed in lease lines. So IT also has to manage the data in terms of version control, with files and data going back and forth to the varying collaborators. Must also consider and manage data security, and of course in this environment, as we just explained, we've now got distributed data, between a myriad of users in many locations. So for IT, this represents an increased demand from them, ultimately an increased cost of managing that data security. So let's move on from here and let's look at how virtualization offers IT and business the solutions that cover these needs and meet those demands. So let's briefly look, and I think this, the best way to start is to briefly look at, well, how does virtualization work? In very simple terms, let's understand how virtualization works, and then we can assess how it meets those needs and demands. In a virtual environment, all of the processing and management is centralized at servers or in the data center. From there, it's virtualized and then delivered as an on-demand service to the users. So the endpoint or user device does no processing. This is all done in the central server. All the endpoint device does simply and securely is connect to the server to access the applications and data. All that goes through the network is effectively mouse movements, keystrokes, pixel changes. So in essence, we highlighted the first thing, which was the hardware needed to process the data. In a desktop workstation deployment, each workstation is specified to run at the highest level or effectively for worst case scenarios. So they normally operate probably at 30% of their resource capability, the remaining resource being largely unused until you get a high demand on it, at which point it's called into play. But most of the time it remains largely unused. So by centralizing hardware resources into a server, all of the CPUs, all of the GPUs are centrally pooled, and what effectively happens there, we get a much higher usage of that resource. It's much more effectively used. It's used as an on-demand service. As a user needs resource, he grabs it from the central server on demand. So we have a huge saving in terms of cost of hardware expenditure, and a huge reduction in cost of hardware management. As this is now all done, we have central servers. We don't have all of these distributed workstations and complicated workstations across the client's estate. Users can access on whatever device they want. This is device and operating system independent. So they can come in on whatever device they want. It fits bring your own device policies from firms. Certainly suits the mobile users who can access plans, even Windows-based applications they can access on an iPad from a remote location. So we're really taking away this high-end distributed workstation model. People can run these on their existing workstations. When they go wrong, they can be replaced by a low-cost, low-maintenance, thin client as the endpoint device. So we're also talking here about where we're centralizing and virtualizing the other side, which is the management of all of those distributed apps, and those users also obviously puts that strain on IT resources. So with the applications all centralized and virtualized, all of the management, patches, upgrades can be done as single instance management and then published to the many and various users. So that takes care of the application management in a distributed basis. We can ensure version control, that the right users have access to the right version of the applications they need. Historically, we see projects that run on for years and years, and therefore there's requirements for different versions of software for different user groups. This can all centrally be managed and controlled by IT at a much lower cost. So all of the users managed centrally by IT, what apps they can access and what data they can access and what devices they can access those on, all controlled centrally by IT. So with all the processing taking place on the server and not the endpoint device, we've got rid of those high-end workspace stations, we've got rid of expensive and cumbersome laptops for the remote users, and we've provided the users a better working environment where they can work when they want, where they want, and on what device they want. So as we indicated, or as I indicated earlier, with all of the data being processed centrally, we no longer move large files over the network. So we've got, of course, a reduction in network traffic. We don't have the distributed data, so we've improved security and obviously data protection, which is becoming more and more relevant, and is at times now we're seeing put as a demand in contract dealings, that IP protection becomes more and more central to the deployment of the IT infrastructure. So effectively with virtualization we see a reduction in hardware expenditure, a better return on investment with more effective investment in servers and not distributed workstation. Also obviously that provides a reduction in the hardware management costs. By centralizing the management of the apps, IT benefits from single instance management, reducing costs on IT while ensuring the users have the access to what apps they need as an on-demand basis. IT has greater control of the user access, the ability for IT to deploy new collaborating users instantly, or even remove users, user groups as the project lifecycle develops. With virtualization, we also see an increased license efficiency. All of the licenses are, of course, controlled centrally, being taken on demand from the central pool. So what we're seeing in real terms in deployments is we're actually often seeing this leading to a reduction in total license expenditure and better use of the licenses across the corporate estate. So with data never leaving the security of the central servers in DC, we see a vast improvement in data security and obviously a reduction in network costs as we're reducing that overall network traffic. So this is why virtualization offers an ideal solution to meet the specific needs and demands of the infrastructure design systems and the infrastructure design suite. So this is why we're doing deployments now of infrastructure design systems in a virtual environment. Now, to explain this in a virtual environment, what does that actually mean? Well, it's what everybody terms cloud computing. So to explain this a little bit and to give you a little bit more information, we find there's so much misleading information spouted by luminaries and visionaries in the industry. They come up with all sorts of terms and terminology regarding cloud computing. And I think from our perspective, I'm just going to give you a little bit of clarity on what we understand by cloud computing. In essence, as we see it, there are really three types of clouds in terms of how we go forward. So let's start with the first, which is the personal clouds. Now, personal clouds are all about the people. It's about enabling them to work and collaborate from any location, at any time, and on any device. So IT doesn't own the personal clouds. They simply, their role is to make this unique cloud of assets, the personal cloud of assets, available anywhere, at any time, and on any device. So that cloud of assets represents the devices, the applications, the data, the contacts, the locations unique to each individual user. So that's what we term the personal clouds. Now, in terms of our deployments, in essence, what we're doing in terms of how we deploy things is effectively with private clouds. Now, private clouds cover the broad mix of applications, data, and users necessary for any organization to function both effectively and securely. Now, these are what are used by IT to centralize and manage applications, desktops, and then deliver them as an on-demand service to the users, and of course doing that while maintaining the high levels of security and control required by the business. Now, the third tier of clouds, as we see it, is the public clouds. Now, public clouds offer organizations additional functionality or service options which are outside their own infrastructure. They provide them with infinite possibilities and expandability as an on-demand service. Now, due principally to the current licensing restrictions, deployments of CAD applications, normally based in the private clouds for organizations, those private clouds will service the personal clouds for the individual, but it's not uncommon for us to touch upon the public cloud functionality, and we'll see this with things like Autodesk cloud rendering services under subscription, or indeed with Microsoft Mail services like Office 365. So that mixed cloud deployment is what we actually refer to as a hybrid cloud solution. But in essence, what we're talking about in terms of our solutions, we're effectively a private cloud deployment. What we do is, of course, cater for the personal clouds of the individual users, and as I say, we will touch upon the public cloud offerings for the added expandability that the company needs to provide those users with the services they need. But in essence, that's where we are in terms of cloud computing. I hope that makes it a little bit clearer. So we're talking about virtualization, we're talking about deployments of infrastructure design suite. How much does this actually cost? So let's look at the realities, and I'm going to do this very much as an overview with a small-scale deployment, but just to give you some kind of idea as to what costs we're looking at. Now, I've calculated this on a single server deployment, so this is 20 users. We're talking 20 concurrent users, and we're talking 20 concurrent users running 3 applications. So it's an indicative cost here to give you a feel of cost implications. For higher numbers of users, obviously we need to multiply this up. If we're talking 60 users plus, then the model changes slightly because we're moving to blade server deployment, so a little bit different. But in effect, this is roughly where we are in terms of what we're talking about at cost levels. So what I've done here, the server we're talking about, in this case, an HP DL 380p, dual 8-core processor running at 2.9 gigahertz. We would be looking at 128 gig of RAM, possibly more, to be honest, with the infrastructure design suite. This is a sort of general overview. 3 hard disks of somewhere in the region of 600 gig, and for this deployment, for these applications, we'd be looking at the Nvidia graphics cards, probably 2 of the Q4000 cards in that server. Now, the costs I've done here, we're including all of your Windows expenditure, all of your Citrix licensing. We're including the renewals of that software because we're taking this on a 3-year basis. We're also including installation costs from IMSCAD and our support costs. Now, I think at this point it's important to just reiterate the fact Every application that we deploy into a virtual environment, we will at the end of the deployment set up a support contract and support those applications in that environment. Now this is whether that particular application is supported for Citrix or not. If we deploy it, we will support it. If we can deploy it, we will support it. So we have test labs here. We can test out all different applications. As I said, we haven't done 2 deployments yet that have been the same. I think every company has a different mix of applications, of add-ons and plugins that they need to use, and some of those from different vendors. So, it's very much a case we have to look at these, each one individually, and work it out individually. But we will support whatever we put in place. So, included in these figures, we're talking about 3 years support cost, 3 years on your licensing, and all of the hardware expenditure. Obviously, we're talking about the server here. We're omitting the endpoint devices, but we can fit into the bring your own device policies, use the existing hardware that exists in a client site, or indeed sweat those assets until they fail to work any longer, and then replace them with really low-cost thin clients or anything of that nature. So to put this in perspective, we come up with a 10-app deployment for 20 users at €64,000. Now, the interesting thing, I think, if you work this backwards, what that calculates to on a per user per month basis is just €89 per user per month for this kind of deployment. So I think what we can see here is this is in real terms actually a very cost-effective solution, a method of deployment when you look at the expensive hardware investment required at desktop workstation to deploy these resource-hungry applications. So this is doing it effectively with workstation comparable performance. So we've shown you its cost-effective solution. It provides the business the benefits that it needs, and it provides the users the functionality that they demand. So we can meet the demands of handling the huge data sets and the large models, the processing and reprocessing needed at project design phase. We'll improve security by removing the distributed data, reducing the network traffic, reducing the cost of lease lines. Virtualization will provide a platform not only to meet the needs of the remote and mobile users, but also the needs of the collaborating multidiscipline users who demand access from all of those variety of locations. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, it provides IT with total control, simplifying management of the users, the applications, and making the business itself better equipped to respond to the changing demands that it faces. So in essence, that's where we are. That's why we should be looking at the infrastructure design suite and a virtual platform. And I hope that's given you a brief overview. Now, we do try and keep these webinars to 30 minutes. I'm about 1 minute shy of my mark, so I've done my planning quite well today. I am going to open up to questions if anybody's got any questions they want to put forward today. Otherwise, my details are on the screen. I'll leave these up for a while for you so that you can contact me and take any queries you've got offline. Now, the one thing I will say, I'm going to point people at our website here. There is loads of useful information on there. We've got case studies of deployments we've done. We've got links to our YouTube channel with other webinars that we've recorded. They're all available for you. You'll see on the website we do series of 30-minute webinars for people quite regularly on different aspects of CAD virtualization and the virtualization technologies. The other thing you will note on there, we have a global reseller map that can point out specialist resellers who specialize in virtualization that are partners of ours on a global basis, so you can find one in your region if there's one you wish to speak to. Obviously, you can contact us directly. And the other thing I will say, we have demo servers set up here in London and also in the US. Those are available for you. If you want to try access, we have the infrastructure design suite loaded on both those servers. We can provide you with access for up to 3 users. You can load your own data sets to work on, and just have a play with those systems. And everybody who does this is very impressed with the level of performance we can achieve. And what I will say is you will be accessing over the open internet without the benefit of any WAN optimization, and we can still give you workstation comparable performance. So that really is something to look at. As I say, I'm going to point everyone at the website. Pop yourselves on there, have a good look around, loads of good information. And obviously my contact details are on the screen now. At the moment I have no questions coming in, so I'm going to leave this screen on the viewer for you. I'd encourage everyone to look at the website and obviously contact me directly or contact us through the website. We'll be more than happy to assist you and provide you with access to those demo servers if you want to see this for real. Thank you very much for your time today. Hope everyone has a good day. Thank you.